Hello everyone and welcome back to SGTV. So today we're going to be talking about renewable energy. Now this is a subject I find quite interesting myself. So we've got the pleasure of having one of our own here at Scolmore. We've got Jake Green joining us on the show. So say hello Jake, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm all good, thanks Ben. I'm keeping busy, lots and lots of stuff going on here at Scolmore and all the other brands that are included with it as well.
It's good to have you on board with us today. So I didn't actually know you've got a bit of a background in renewable energies.
Yeah, so started some time ago, probably 8-9 years ago. That's when it first all kicked off, and all the feed-in tariffs, which I know we're going to cover a bit later on, when they all kicked off, that's when I was first in it. So we were seeing the installs be sort of massive prices, but they're also reaping the benefits with the feed-in tariffs as well. So I spent a long time fitting, installing all across the UK with plenty of large installs as well as the standard small domestic ones.
So what credentials, if any, do you need as an electrician to go into installing renewable energy, such as solar panels and that kind of thing?
Well, you need the fundamentals. So having your qualifications to be electricians probably always advantageous to make sure that you know what you're talking about, because the fundamentals with any electrical work and solar PV are pretty much the same. So nothing really changes. However, you do need to know about the DC components, which is not really covered when you look at the electrical courses. It's touched upon, but it's not in the depth that you need to have when it looks at solar PV. So you can go and do either a City and Guilds course, or you can do the EAL course as well. Okay,
so that's on top of your, well, I know it's quite a debatable subject on what qualifications makes you an electrician. So we're talking additional qualifications, really.
Yeah, so you're going to be having to go back and retrain at some point if you want to get into the solar PV market or any other renewables. I know there's plenty of others which we're going to come on to as well, but yeah, you're going to need to go back to college for at least a week or so to do a bit more training.
Okay, I probably shouldn't have said that about the debatable subject. We're going to get people in the comments now saying, well, you only need to do this, or you should be doing this, but that's another subject in itself. But funnily enough, most of the people we've had on SGTV, and even Sparkies I speak to, out there, I haven't really had many who have any involvement in this kind of thing. So do you think there's many electricians in the UK doing it?
Well, there was the rent a roof scheme, which the large energy providers were sort of driving down to the sort of the medium-sized enterprises, and they were sort of pushing that market forward. A lot of people sort of early doors when it came about, with mentioned the feed-in tariffs, when they were really high, a lot of people got involved in it, and they said, yeah, that's great. We're going to get plenty of installs off the back of it, because people can see that they're going to be getting more money throughout the years. It slowly died off purely because of the feed-in tariff. So when you're talking about there's not anybody in the market, there is people still in the market. There are people still doing it. It's a lot slower than it was because the grants and the schemes are just not there to provide the people. Typically when we first started to see them come out, they were sort of 18, 19 grand installs. But the more and more that people had it, the more and more the prices come down, and that's why the feed-in tariffs dropped as well.
So the tariffs originally were quite rewarding, weren't they?
Yeah, so they were around about 47p, and then after a period of time, they actually went up to about, I think it was about 51p. Don't quote me too much on that, because I can't remember the figures. It was a long time ago, but I do know they sort of dropped all the way down to 12p, and then they kind of went from that point there, they started to slowly decrease again. Now, the feed-in tariff scheme is no longer available. So again, like I mentioned, that's probably why people are not pushing it as heavy as they used to be.
Why do you think the tariffs have changed? Is it companies maybe realising they're losing out on money? Bigger companies, so to speak?
I wouldn't say companies. I'd say it's more the government. So the incentives that came from them to say that we need to kickstart this, we need to get our carbon footprint down. This is one way of doing it. Everybody went out and said that's great. I know people that have had the installs done when they first came about. The feed-in tariffs came about, and they're absolutely reaping the rewards now. They're sort of sitting on. They could be on anything up to £2,000 payback per year. So after that, and it started decreasing, that's probably why, because nobody's actually getting a return on investment. The return on investment probably taking a longer time to pay back than actually what some people may live for, or because I didn't really ever see too many younger people having it. A lot of older people were having it because it was, something to recoup some money back.
Do you think, is there much government support or funding for electricians? I know there's certain schemes, and we'll come to that for homeowners, but is there anything in particular out there for sparkies, electricians wanting to get into installing them?
Not really. Again, it's down to the business and the way that they're driving it. If they want to get into that market, it's like anything, Ben. If you see there's a niche in there and you can get in and still sort of make your money, that's probably the driver. But if you're not going to be able to, sustain regular work on a constant basis, so you're going to get 2 or 3 installs a week, then it's probably not really going to be driving your business forward. So there's not really any support in that terms. There's not really any support for the training, as far as I'm aware.
It's just a shame, really, isn't it? Because, I mean, it's something I wanted to talk to you about a bit later on in the episode, but I suppose going forward, I'd imagine to keep up with the demands as being an electrician, electricians might need to be getting more involved.
Yeah.
Or do you think maybe not? Do you think it is quite split?
I think I always say this when I've done any sort of college work and I've done some talks with any students. I always say that back in the day, when people like Darren or whoever were training, they got involved in all parts of the industry. So they were doing the domestic, industrial, commercial. They were doing all those types of work. As where now you actually find that each individual business probably splits down into 1 or 2 of those parts, and they don't really cross all 3. And if they do, they're probably a time sales spark, so they've had the experience within their market. So to actually say that, people are going to be going into that market purely, I don't think that would be the case, because typically it's in that domestic market. So it's probably a domestic company with that as a bolted extra onto their business.
Are commercial properties having them more, like say smaller industrial units, that kind of thing?
Well, again, the tariffs are not there. If you're using a large amount of electricity, then yeah, it's probably beneficial to have them on large buildings, such as our offices here at Scolmore. We probably look to have them purely because it would actually save us money in the long run, not necessarily to get a return on investment.
Yeah, because I suppose it's a lot of the time when you can see an end goal to things you're paying off, can't you? Like your mortgage or a loan, whereas your electricity bill that's coming in every single month, there's no end to that. But if you can invest in a way of bringing that down, or at least to an end, I suppose that's a selling point in itself.
Well, yeah, and again, I think the next big thing moving on from the PV, I know we've focused quite a bit on that so far, but it's going to be battery storage. So I think what will happen in sort of maybe 5 years' time, I've not got my crystal ball out, but I think in 5 years' time that it'll actually see battery storage coming in more and more in people's properties, and then they'll be standalone, or they'll be exporting their surplus energy that's stored in the batteries back to the grid. And again, that's when the feed-in tariffs would start to kick back in. So the whole idea of it is that you generate your own electricity via solar panels, or whether it's a wind turbine, and then you store it, and then what you don't use, you would then send back to the grid. So I can see that coming in a lot more. I actually had a quick look, probably sort of 3-4 months ago, actually, doing my own home for something like that. But unfortunately, my solar PV wouldn't actually produce anything because I haven't got the right orientation.
Well, like south-facing roof, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can have an east-west split, but sometimes you don't get the generation throughout the day, especially through the winter months when the sun's a lot lower. You may not actually get the generation there.
Yeah. Talking of battery systems, so again, I've had a quick look myself for my own home, and I often see companies that are offering to install it. There's usually 2 options. It's usually, like you've mentioned, the battery storage system, or I think, what do they call it? Direct usage. So whatever you're producing there and then is what you'd use. But it's not really beneficial if people are out of home during the day at work, where you're getting the most amount of sunlight. You're coming home at night where you're not really benefiting from that, are you?
Well, that's the whole idea of the storage. So that when we used to see solar PV, so typically the load profile used to be high in the morning, dip down between the day, and then rise back up again at night time. So you actually were exporting all your energy pretty much throughout the day. When the sun was, at its best, its highest, you was exporting most of that energy, and then back in the evening, you was just pretty much using it all up again. So it didn't really make any sense. And that's the whole idea of the battery storage, is that during that flat profile, you will be storing the energy opposed to exporting it back. And then when it comes to the evening, that's when you would start to use that energy back again.
And I'm guessing it's a more expensive route having that storage facility in place.
It is, yeah, because you're actually having the panels and a battery storage unit.
But like you say, because you're storing it, you're making use of it as well. So you've got to balance those options, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean the return on investment would be probably pretty good. I would imagine it'd be pretty good on battery storage, because the sun's not going anywhere. It's always going to be there, whether it's a cloudy day, which will still produce on the solar panels. It may not, use your full demand, but I think we're going to see that ramping up surely in the next 5 years.
So let's talk slightly technical. I don't want to go too into it, but just as an overview for anyone who doesn't know how it works with your meter and your consumer unit, because obviously people see the feed come into the meter and then the consumer unit being spread out. So how does it work with your solar panels? If you've got essentially two feeds, you've got from the grid and from panels or any kind of renewable energy, how does that work going into your house?
Without getting too technical, Ben, it's pretty much, you'll have the solar panels sitting on the roof, and then from there, the cables will take them into an inverter, so it'll convert DC into AC. That AC would then travel back down to the main intake, and then any surplus energy would be generated back to the grid, so without getting too technical.
It doesn't make much difference of how you'd wire your consumer unit?
No, because it's on its own circuit, individual to anything else to do with the house. I know that what you can do as well is you can get these bits of kit that will clip onto your water heater. So like we just mentioned a minute ago about that flat profile, if you want to keep your hot water hot throughout the day, you can actually divert some of that energy that's being produced from the solar panels to that piece of equipment as well.
It makes sense, though, doesn't it? If you've got excess energy or heat, you might as well try and make as much use out of all of it as possible.
Yeah, and like I say, that the people that got in a bit later on to having solar panels, the feed-in tariff's not great, so you want to make the most of that energy, opposed to bringing it in and importing the energy. You want to use what's being produced throughout the day.
Yeah. So other than solar panels, we're seeing small wind turbines or even pole-mounted wind turbines. There's also air source heat pumps now. Have you had much experience with those kind of things?
I didn't really get involved with the wind turbine side of things because you need a large amount of space. You need to go through a lot more hoops. You need planning permission if you're having the pole mounted ones. They need to be in areas where there's because they are quite noisy. Actually, I've just moved into a new house and they're opposite. I've got loads in front of me. I can't hear them, which is nice, but they do generate some noise. And I think from my research is that the return on investment isn't the best compared to what you would get with solar panels. Typically speaking, if you were looking, they were sort of anything from 20 grand up to £35,000 to install. So, you're talking a long time and a lot of energy to be produced and exported back to the grid in order to get your payback.
Yeah. Another thing I remember hearing, especially when we first started seeing solar panels and turbines coming out, is let's say 20 grand, for example, of how much it might cost. That might be a wrong figure, I don't know. But let's say you've put 20 grand's worth of solar panels on your roof, and by the time you've got that money back from saving money, it's time to replace them again. How true is that?
Well, not necessarily the panels. If they're looked after and they're cleaned, a lot of them are self-cleaning, but they do eventually will need a clean because the algae will grow on them over a period of time. Obviously, the water sustains on them sometimes. But realistically, the only thing that could potentially go wrong with the install is the inverter, which is the main part which converts the DC to the AC. That's when that would need replacing. Typically speaking, they're about 1,000 up to 2,000, depending on brands and the size of your install. So I think that they're suggesting that they're around about 25, 30 years, but the inverters themselves, I believe that most of the manufacturers put a 10-year warranty on those. So after 10 years, you are going to have to spend a little bit of money maybe to replace that. Again, don't quote me on exactly the figures and the dates because manufacturers are all different.
Yeah, but it's a big difference between people saying it's going to cost you 20 grand to replace all of this and 1 to 2 grand, which, let's say for argument's sake, might be the cost of what you'd spend on a new boiler every 10 years or so.
Yeah, I mean the actual install of the system, a lot of the money is down to the labour, and a lot of it is to do with mounting the rails that sit on roofs. That's the time-consuming thing. To actually get up and replace a panel, you can sort of do one typically in anything from 25 minutes to an hour to replace a panel. So the cost of the panel plus a few hours labour is not actually that expensive to replace the panels. It's the actual initial installation with mounting the rails, cutting the tiles, and making sure that they're sturdy and secure.
So when you're mounting the rails, this is a good point actually. Is I've never really thought too much about it. You see them on there, you think, oh yeah, looks good. But so what are you doing? You're having to cut through tiles into your joists and put flashing around every single panel, kind of thing.
So they're fitted by brackets. You normally slide the tiles up, mark the tile out, cut the tile, and then slide it back down, making sure that there's obviously no penetration through to the inside. And then, simply do all the brackets all the way across the roof, then mount your rails, and then on top of the rails, that's where the panels would sit.
Okay. We've sort of touched on air source heat pumps. Is that something you've done much with?
I've fitted a couple, not many, because again, it was relatively new technology when I was on the tools. So I did a couple, not too much into there, but again, they are a good investment piece because, again, you make your money back over a period of time, and then after that, it's pretty much free electricity and free energy.
Were they, out of interest, was the installs you did on new builds or older properties?
Actually, you'd be surprised. Most of them were retrofit. So you were dealing with, rotting timbers on really old properties. I actually did one on a school that had to be completely re-roofed before we could actually put the panels on there because it was just all going rotten. So they needed to be re-roofed before we'd actually even touch putting the installation on the top. But no, not always new builds. We had some where we were actually mounting them at the end of people's gardens, on ballast boxes. So you're making sure that they're at the right angle, the brackets are all okay. So not necessarily on roofs sometimes, it was, on freestanding directly at the sun.
Yeah. How suitable have you found that the air pumps are on older properties? Because again, one thing I've heard is they're great for new builds where you can just go in, install them how you want, but retrofitting them to older properties can sometimes be an issue.
Well, the couple that I did were actually on old properties. They do take a lot of planning, and you need, quite a bit of space for the compressor that sits outside, the heat exchange, and all of the gubbins that go with it. So you need, quite a large space. Sometimes you don't get that with older properties because they're designed in ways where you can't get them in.
Yeah,
I'd just say that they need forward planning really more than anything.
Yeah. Do you think is there much of a trend based on where you live, where Sparkies are installing these? So is it more rural areas where you might, like farming areas where you might not necessarily be on the grid as much, or is it less common in cities where everyone's just hooked up to the grid and happy to crack on?
I think when you start to look at cities, especially, if you're looking at London, they're all high-rise buildings. Sometimes the sun doesn't hit certain parts of the ground until maybe sort of 2 o'clock, and by that time they're not going to be generating anymore. So yes, the rural ones are probably a lot easier to achieve your return on investment opposed to being in the city where, I think people, like you said, people are just happy to have electricity, let alone worrying about renewables as well.
Yeah. One question I've got here, I don't actually know what it means, but I've been asked to ask, what is a FIT scheme and what is a SEG scheme?
So they were the two schemes that are being run by the government. The feed-in tariff, which is the FIT, that's the one where you, when you export, you get money back. The SEG is very similar, but it's not quite as lucrative when you start to look at the payments that are paid back. I've got it down here. It's a smart export guarantee. So what they're suggesting is that sometimes energy may fall in price, as where the people that are giving you the energy have to give you a minimum payment, so it can't fall below that zero price.
Okay. The amount of power it would take to power your home. Let's talking solar power. What are we talking here? Because I know each house, each building is going to be different, but surely there's got to be an average sort of kilowatt usage for your average domestic house. How achievable is it to match that with basic solar panels on your roof?
It's very easy, so long as that you're being energy efficient within the property as well. You know, we're using like low energy lamps. We're putting the washing machine on throughout the day, so that we're actually making benefit of that of the sun during the day. So it's very achievable. Again, it's just dependent on the homeowner themselves and the size of the property. 4 kilowatts, typically speaking, is what you would see on top of a normal sized house, right the way down to sort of 1.2 kilowatts. So you may find that if you haven't got the roof space, you can't actually achieve that. But if you do have the roof space and you do have the largest system possible on your roof, then it's very achievable, Ben.
So feasibility comes down to a number of factors, really, doesn't it? Angle, position, all those kind of things. See, whenever I watch, your shows like Grand Designs or any of those kind of housing building shows, I always find it interesting that they can make, whether it's a small home or a massive house, they're making it self-sufficient electrically with solar panels. So when you see new builds go up, just general domestic new builds for people, whether that's social housing or private, why aren't we seeing solar panels being built on them? If you're able to do it with these big properties, surely we can do it with the smaller ones.
You can, and again, it does take a lot of planning, and there needs to be that incentive from the government to push that forward. I know that when you look at new builds, the rating of the house is done by an EPC, so an energy performance certificate. When you look at new builds now, though, Ben, they are so energy efficient inside. I've actually just bought a new build, and actually the energy efficiency of it is incredible. The heat doesn't escape from there. It's constantly warm. So the amount of carbon footprint or energy that you're using, during the night to keep it warm is a lot less than what it would have been, when we're looking at the single skin bricked or the no cavity builds back in the day.
Yeah. So, I mean, even with that being said, surely even having less solar panels would be good. If we're talking cost, if cost is a factor, like I said, whether it's social housing or private stock, the cost it would take to add a very small solar system into that property, with it being so energy efficient, surely there's got to be some room there for that to happen.
Well, you'd like to think so. But again, it's all down to the house builder and what the government has set out.
What they want to spend.
Not necessarily what they want to spend, because if they were putting that into the price, they would just increase the price of the house. Again, we touched on it earlier. Maybe it's a shortage in skills, and people are afraid to fit the PV. It may be an option for house builders, but like I say, they can't find the workforce to do it.
Yeah. I've been speaking about conservation areas as well. So obviously, up and down the country, you've got listed buildings, your touristy buildings, your palaces, that kind of thing. I know this is not really your general domestic market, but even so, these buildings are going to have massive energy bills. So surely, with those kind of running costs, they'd be looking to get involved with this kind of thing. But then we look into aesthetics. So do you think that places like your grade listed buildings and country houses are going to be having these kind of systems in place, or purely for aesthetics and tourism they'll just shun it?
Well, again, it comes down to what the government's going to allow, or the land heritage people will allow, to make sure that that grade 2 listed building or the palaces are preserved in a manner which they look immaculate and they look like they were however many years ago they were built. So there's ways around it. They could, if they've got a large amount of land, they could potentially have a small solar farm at the bottom of the garden in a cordoned off area. But again, it's all down to the types of people that live there. They may find that they don't want to see it. If they don't want to see it, we've got to look at not necessarily the domestic market, but if you travel all around the country like I do, then you generally see a lot of solar farms within the countryside. They're always massive farms with lots and lots of panels, and that's going to be helping to drive our carbon footprint down, regardless of whether somebody in a grade 2 listed building has them.
Yeah, and like we've said on most of these questions, really, a lot of it comes down to cost. But I want to talk about cost for a homeowner and the expense for an electrician. So what would you say, and again, it's quite rough, but what would you say is an average sort of cost for, let's say, a standard semi-detached house to be completely self-sufficient in energy?
So if you was looking at, you had solar panels, you had the other one that I wanted to mention as well, Ben, is solar thermal, which is to heat your hot water.
Okay.
Which is
they're like the tubular.
Yeah, that's the one.
Panels,
they actually, there is some incentives from the government to still fit them. You get them under the green. I think it's the Green Home Grant. I'll just write that down somewhere. Yeah, the Green Home Grant. You can get some money towards one of those solar thermals. So if you had solar panels and a solar thermal system and the battery storage, you're probably looking sort of in the realms of about £20,000 to have all of that.
Okay.
But the cost of it, I don't know what the cost of everybody's electricity is, but if we just looked at my own, I'll probably suggest that I'm paying anything up to £50 a month. So what's that? £600 a year. So you got times that divide that by your 20,000 to see how many years.
Quite a few years, but there's no guarantee on the price of energy currently, though, is there? I mean,
no.
I suppose most people notice their energy bills going up and up in each month, and that could again be another selling point for a home. And I'm thinking, I don't want to have that uncertainty financially going forward. I'm happy to, if you can afford it or loan, however that would be, just get it done.
Yeah, and again, it's down to the person asking to have the installation done. They might have, they might be thinking about the environment as well, to suggest that I don't want to be burning fossil fuels when I can have something on my roof that will do the same thing and be much more energy efficient and friendly for the environment.
Yeah. What about for the installer himself? I mean, if you're a domestic installer, you're going into a wholesaler, you're buying a house full of sockets and lights. Yes, it comes out of your pocket temporarily until you're reimbursed, but it's not a huge amount. What are we talking solar-wise? And where would one get one? Would you go into your typical wholesaler to get your inverters and batteries?
So there used to be, well, I should imagine there still is, there used to be, people just dealing with solar purely. So you would go to a solar wholesaler and they would tell you what they've got, what they haven't got. But in terms of, paying for it up front, I guess that's down to the electrician and the business itself. So, if you're probably thinking this as well, that's probably why, the smaller companies don't get involved in it, because the outlay is huge. Compared to like what you just mentioned there, a few switches and sockets and a few lights, you're talking sort of £6-7 grand. They've got to have that capital within the bank to be able to go out and purchase their materials. And we've seen it too many times where people have just been stung because they've cancelled it, and all of a sudden that system's been designed for that property.
Yeah,
it may not be able to be used on a different one. So all of a sudden the contractor's got a system in stock that he can no longer use. I think a lot of people would be sensible if they were to take deposits for the materials. That way, then they can look after their own business.
Yeah, it's one thing, isn't it? If you've got a customer who has either cancelled your job or perhaps being a pain paying you, losing out on a few sockets, although it's not nice because that's their living, it's not the end of the world. But like you say, if you've got £6 grand's worth of panels or something that's suited for one building, you could potentially come unstuck there, couldn't you?
Yeah, I mean the panels could be reused on a different job, but there's different wattages, there's different designs. People may not like them, etc. So it's just one of those things. I think you've got to be careful when you're looking at getting into that market.
Yeah. I read a quote this morning that said the UK government has promised that every home in the UK will be powered by wind by 2030, as it invests in floating wind turbines. So I know we're steering off from solar panels there, but how realistic would you say that is, just from your experience of dealing with this kind of thing?
I think it's very realistic. We've seen the wind farms offshore; they're absolutely humongous. There's thousands of them. Right the way from the North Sea up in Scotland, all the way down to sort of Kent way. There's lots and lots off that side of the country. That is a realistic target, and if that's what they're suggesting, then hopefully that's a way forward. I know that we're currently, sort of teetering on 50 to 60% of our energy consumed within the country is being produced by sort of renewable energies.
Yeah, if it means my bill's going down, I'm all up for it. So,
well, I wouldn't suggest that they're going to go down. I think
No,
it's going to be pretty similar
Yeah.
because of the cost of actually installing these floating wind turbines.
I did see some of the figures. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I know it was in the tens of millions to install these kind of things. So I imagine they're going to want me and you to pay it back at some point.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Where do you see the future going for renewable energies as for the electrician going forward?
Well, listen, it's not going anywhere. Clearly, it's one of those things that's always going to be there. It's always going to be a requirement for it. I think if you're not in it at the moment, you could look at getting into it. However, it's one of those markets that's quite niche. But I think the next biggest thing is going to be, Ben, is the battery storage and sort of islanding yourself, as it were, to make you self-sufficient, getting you off the grid, and anything that you don't use will be exported back to the grid. I think that's going to be the next big thing. The cost of that will start to come down with the battery prices decreasing the more and more people that have them installed.
Do you think there'd be any kind of resistance, though, from, let's say, I don't want to be going political, but let's say energy companies and governments, people like that, if they're set to lose money because people are becoming self-sufficient, do you see there being any kind of pullback there?
There's always going to be, we spoke earlier about the feed-in tariffs and how that affected the government. We know people that are, sort of making £2,000-3,000 a year back from the government, plus the cheaper energy that they're using throughout the day as well. So they cut the feed-in tariffs for that. I would imagine there's going to be something similar to suggest that actually, if you are islanding, they probably won't let you export anymore. So if you're generating your own electricity and then trying to sell it back to the grid, they may just turn around and say, actually, no, we're not going to be paying you for it. That way, they're losing you as a customer, but they're not then also paying you a fee to have your energy.
Yeah. Another thing, just going back to saving money, we ourselves here at Scolmore, we've got like smart products. We've got the Click Smart Plus range. Products like that in itself are going to be great for saving money, aren't they? Because you can control things, set things on timers, so you're not wasting energy. And I suppose more of that is what we need as well. Not necessarily relying on solar, but smarter usage, so to speak.
Yeah, it's that old saying is, you work smarter, not harder, sort of thing. So you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can. It's no good having solar panels on your roof and then all of a sudden you're having all your windows open on a freezing cold day and letting all the heat out. It just kind of defeats the object. So you need to sort of bolt all the windows up and whatnot to keep all that energy in. And like you said, the smart products that we have here at Scolmore are fantastic for doing that, because we've got things like temperature sensors, humidity sensors. We can control all of that and make sure that we're being as energy efficient as possible.
Yeah, and people are getting more clued up, aren't they? Not only on wanting to save money on their bills, but even, like you said before, people are being more conscious about how they're fueling their homes. They don't want to be burning or using energy that's burning fossil fuels and damaging the environment. And with all that being said, hopefully it has a good knock-on effect for our industry as well. You're getting more people wanting solar, more people being able to install it, more businesses popping up from doing that. So fingers crossed, that's a good positive and a way for the industry to go.
Yeah, I think it is, and it's not, like I said already, it's not going to go away. It's one of those things, on the news this morning, they're actually, they were talking about energy saving and talking about carbon footprints, etc. this is one way of doing that, and it's been around for a number of years now. I mean, lots of on the continent, and they use it as well. They use solar thermal a lot. So I can't see it going away. Like you say, it's just a matter of time before it starts to ramp up again, especially with the battery storage.
So that's all we got time for today. I want to thank Jake for coming on the show and giving us his expertise. It's been a learning lesson for me, and I hope anyone out there has found it interesting. Maybe it's inspired you to think about going into installing solar. So yeah, I want to thank you all for watching. Thank you again, Jake.
No worries. Thank you for having me on. I'm sure I'll be back at some point going through a different topic.
Like you said, I didn't know you got this kind of experience, so I'm sure there's plenty more things you've got up your sleeve that we can talk about. So it'd be a pleasure to have you back on the show. Right then, everyone out there, thank you for watching. Hope you make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification button, all those good things, and we'll see you next time.